So now let's start chapter 11 in Katzung's board reviews. So this unit is all about cardiovascular drugs, and this chapter will deal with drugs used in hypertension. We'll abbreviate it as HTN. Okay, so hypertension. Hypertension is recognized as a major risk factor for several potentially lethal cardiovascular conditions, including MI, myocardial infarction, and heart failure and stroke. So, new guidelines were issued in 2017 by the American Heart Association and American College of Cardiology, so AHA or ACC, urging more active prevention and treatment of hypertension. According to the 2017 guidelines, average systolic pressure greater than 120 but less than 130 is considered as elevated. So let's just write them down here. Greater than 120 and less till 130, that is elevated, and pressure equal to or greater than 130 by 80 but less than 140 by 89 is considered as stage 1 hypertension, while pressures equal to or greater than 140 by 90 are considered as stage 2 hypertension. Okay, so the normal levels, as you all know from physiology, is 120 by 80. So 120 to 130 is elevated, greater than 130 by 80 till 140 by 89 is stage 1 hypertension, whereas greater than or equal to 140 by 90 is stage 2 hypertension. So increased systolic pressure is now considered at least as important as elevated diastolic. So both stage 1 and stage 2 hypertension are deserving of treatment in most patients, and the guidelines urge. Okay, so what do they urge? The guidelines urge that causes and treatment of atherosclerosis also be attended to, because you're not only dealing with the cardiac part, you're also dealing with the vascular part, the vessels of atherosclerosis. Many drugs are available for treatment of hypertension, and in most patients, blood pressure can now be effectively controlled with minimal adverse effects. Antihypertensive drugs are organized around a clinical indication, the need to treat the underlying disease rather than a single receptor type. The drugs covered in this unit have a variety of mechanisms of action, including diuresis, sympathoplegia, which is interference with the sympathetic nervous system, vasodilation, and antagonism of the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, or the RAS, and many agents are available in most of these categories. So let us look at the basic classification of drugs used in hypertension. So this is the major heading, drugs used in hypertension. So we have different families. So we have diuretics. We'll deal with them later in a separate chapter. Sympathoplegics, so they interfere with the activities of the sympathetic nervous system. So you have things that interfere with CNS sympathetic outflow. You have clonidine, okay, and then you have the ganglion blockers, hexamethonium. Nerve terminal antagonists, you have guanethidine and reserpine. Okay, reserpine acts at the reserves. Where do you have the reserves? At the terminal place, right? So at the nerve terminals, guanethidine and reserpine. Okay, then alpha or beta receptors, you have prazosin and propranolol. Okay, then coming to the vasodilators, you have blockers such as calcium channel blockers. You have nifedipine, which is a prototypic example. Then you have older oral vasodilators such as hydralazine. Okay, older ones. Okay, all the water related ones are older, right? So hydralazine. And then parenteral vasodilators such as nitroprusside, obviously nitroprusside. Okay, any nitric oxide derivative, nitroprusside. Okay, then we have angiotensin antagonists. So we have ACE inhibitors such as captopril and receptor blockers such as losartan. And then we also have renin inhibitors such as aliskiren. Okay, so let's move on to certain high yield terms. So we have the baroreceptor reflex. So this is a primary autonomic mechanism for blood pressure homeostasis. It involves sensory input from the carotid sinus and the aortic arch baroreceptors to the vasomotor center and output via the parasympathetic and sympathetic motor nerves. So we'll discuss that in the figure. Catecholamine reuptake pump. So the nerve terminal transporter responsible for recycling norepinephrine after release into the synapse. It is also called NET or norepinephrine transporter. The catecholamine vesicle pump. So it is a storage vesicle transporter that pumps catecholamine from neural cytoplasm into the storage vesicle, also called the vesicle monoamine transporter or VMAT. Okay, and then we have end organ damage. So it is vascular damage in the heart, kidney, retina, brain, resulting in diminished perfusion of these organs. Then we have essential hypertension, which is hypertension of unknown etiology. You don't know what is causing the hypertension. It is also called primary hypertension. Next, false transmitter is a substance, for example, such as octopamine, which is stored in the vesicles and released into the synaptic cleft, but it lacks the effectiveness of the true transmitter, such as norepinephrine. So then we have hypertensive malignancy, which is also called malignant hypertension. It is an accelerated form of severe hypertension associated with rising blood pressure and rapidly progressing damage to vessels and end organs, often signaled by renal damage, encephalopathy, and retinal hemorrhages, or by angina, stroke, or myocardial infarction. So you either have vascular events such as hemorrhages, leakage of blood through the vessels, so retinal hemorrhages and all, and renal damage, or otherwise you have cardiac manifestations such as angina, stroke, or RMI. Then orthostatic hypotension is hypotension on assuming upright posture, or postural hypotension, because this is actually an ineffectiveness of the baroreceptor reflex. So after that you have the postganglionic neuron blockers. So they are drugs that block transmission by an action in the terminals of the postganglionic nerves. Rebound hypertension is elevated blood pressure, usually above pre-treatment levels, resulting from loss of antihypertensive drug effect. You are losing the drug effect, which is supposed to cause antihypertension, so that causes rebound hypertension. Then reflex tachycardia is tachycardia resulting from lowering of blood pressure mediated by the baroreceptor reflex. And then secondary hypertension is hypertension caused by a diagnosable abnormality such as aortic coarctation, renal artery stenosis, adrenal tumor, etc., and you can compare it with essential hypertension. And then stepped care is progressive addition of drugs to an antihypertensive regimen, progressive addition, starting with one, usually a diuretic, and adding in stepwise fashion an angiotensin inhibitor, a sympatholytic, and a vasodilator. So you start with a diuretic, okay, so D, you start like this, you make this a step by using what? An angiotensin inhibitor. Okay, so angiotensin inhibitor. And then what do you do? A sympatholytic. You add another step, and then what do? You add a vasodilator. So vasodilator. Okay. You start with a diuretic, then an angiotensin inhibitor, then in a stepwise fashion a sympatholytic, and then a vasodilator. So sympatholytic or sympathoplegic is a drug that reduces the effects of the sympathetic nervous system. Less than 20% of the cases of hypertension are due to secondary factors that can be clearly defined and corrected. This type of hypertension is associated with pheochromocytoma, coarctation of the aorta, renal vascular disease, adrenal cortical tumors, and few other rare conditions. Most cases of hypertension are idiopathic, also called primary or essential hypertension. The strategies for treating idiopathic hypertension are based on the determinants of arterial pressure. So these strategies include reductions of blood volume, sympathetic effects, vascular smooth muscle tension, and angiotensin effects. Unfortunately, in primary hypertension, the baroreceptor reflex and the renin response are reset to maintain the higher blood pressure. As a result, they respond to a therapeutically lowered blood pressure with compensatory homeostatic responses, which may be significant. So as indicated in a figure which we will be discussing, these compensatory responses can be counteracted with beta blockers and diuretics or angiotensin antagonists. Okay, so diuretics will cover them in greater detail in a later chapter, but these are mentioned here because of their importance in hypertension. So these drugs lower blood pressure by reduction of blood volume and probably also by a direct vascular effect that is not fully understood. So as of now, the drug, let us say this is a container which has a certain volume of fluid in it. So if you remove the fluid, if you cause a hole and you cause diuresis, remove the fluid, what happens is the weight of the liquid or fluid in that container reduces and less pressure is exerted by that fluid on the walls of the container. So that is how we are reducing the pressure by using diuretics. The diuretics most important for treating hypertension are the thiazides. So you have the chlorthalidone and hydrochlorothiazide, and the loop diuretics such as furosemide. So thiazides may be adequate in mild and moderate hypertension, but the loop agents are used in severe hypertension and hypertensive emergencies. So how do you write severe? You start with an S, okay? You have loops in it. So loop diuretics such as furosemide are used in severe cases of HTN, hypertension. So thiazides may be adequate in mild and moderate hypertension. Compensatory responses to blood pressure lowering by diuretics are minimal. When thiazides are given, the maximal antihypertensive effect is often achieved with doses lower than those required for the maximal diuretic effect. Okay, so you don't need the maximal diuretic effect dose. You can achieve maximal antihypertensive effect with a lower dose. Okay, so here you can look at certain compensatory responses to antihypertensive drugs. You have diuretics, the thiazides and loop agents. The compensatory responses are minimal. Okay, again for beta blockers, the compensatory responses are minimal. ACE inhibitors, again minimal. So Skillkeeper, a new drug is under development for the treatment of HTN. What types of data will the producer of this drug have to provide before beginning clinical trials? What data will be needed to market the drug? We'll discuss that later. So let us just discuss this figure or flowchart which illustrates the compensatory responses to decrease blood pressure when treating hypertension. So there is hypertension in the patient, you have given the initial treatment and there is decrease in the blood pressure. Okay, so what are the compensatory responses? So because the blood pressure is decreasing, your sympathetic system will be triggered and it will in turn trigger the heart to have a great have tachycardia, increase the heart rate, okay, beat at a faster rate. So there is a compensatory increase in sympathetic outflow which causes tachycardia, and this results again in an increased blood pressure. And then there is compensatory increased renin secretion, okay, because there is a decrease in the BP, renin is being secreted. So diuretics and ACE inhibitors, you can use this to stop this compensatory effect, but what ultimately renin leads to is salt and water retention, and you are actually causing buildup of the fluid along with salt. So wherever goes salt follows. So salt retention causes water retention, increase in pressure. This results in an increase in blood pressure. Okay. So now moving on to the sympathoplegic. So sympathoplegic drugs interfere with the sympathetic control of cardiovascular function. The result is a reduction of one or more of the following. So venous tone, heart rate, contractile force of the heart, cardiac output, and total peripheral resistance. Compensatory responses are significant for some of these agents. Sympathoplegics are subdivided by the anatomical site of action. Okay, so we'll discuss the figure later. Moving on to baroreceptor sensitizing agents, a few natural products such as veratrum alkaloids appear to increase sensitivity of baroreceptor sensory nerves and reduce the SNS outflow while increasing the vagal tone to the heart. These agents are toxic and no clinically available drugs act at this site. Okay, let us actually discuss the figure. I think that is better. So this is the baroreceptor reflex arc, and this, there's also the sites of action of sympathoplegic drugs. Okay. So basically the baroreceptors, you have them in the carotid sinus, okay, then you have the afferent nerve, which is the sensory fiber here. It goes to the nucleus tractus solitarius or NTS and the vasomotor center in the brain, in the medulla, and then there are descending tracts in the spinal cord. From there you have a relay to the autonomic ganglion, and then from there you have motor fibers, so the efferents. Okay, so you have the autonomic ganglion here and sympathetic nerve ending here, and this results in an ending of the sympathetic nerve ending on either the alpha or the beta receptors. Okay, so at what all places can you actually moderate by using drugs? So all these letters, so you can have drugs that act on the baroreceptors themselves. You can have drugs that act on the NTS, nucleus tractus solitarius, or in the vasomotor center. Then you can have drugs that act at the sites of the autonomic ganglia, at the sympathetic nerve endings, at the nerve terminals, and on the receptors themselves. Okay. So we discussed drugs that act on the baroreceptors first. Okay, so on the carotid arch, aortic arch or carotid body baroreceptors, okay, at this level. Now we're talking about sympathoplegics that act in the CNS, okay. So alpha-2 selective agonists, so clonidine and methyl dopa, cause a decrease in sympathetic outflow by the activation of alpha-2 receptors in the CNS. These drugs readily enter the CNS when given orally. So methyl dopa is a prodrug. It is transported to the brain and then converted to methyl norepinephrine. Clonidine and methyl dopa reduce blood pressure by reducing the cardiac output, vascular resistance, or both. The major compensatory response is salt retention. Sudden discontinuation of clonidine causes rebound hypertension. Okay, clone. Okay, if there are two people, a clone and a normal person. If you remove the clone, if a person is attached to his clone, if you remove it, he will get angry. Okay, so it will rise. There is rebound hypertension, which may be severe. Sudden discontinuation of clonidine causes rebound hypertension. This rebound increase in blood pressure can be controlled by reinstitution of clonidine therapy or administration of alpha blockers such as phentolamine. Methyl dopa occasionally causes hematological immunotoxicity detected initially by test tube agglutination of red blood cells or positive Coombs test, and in some patients progressing to hemolytic anemia, which causes that methyl dopa. It causes hematological immunotoxicity. Both drugs may cause sedation, so methyl dopa more so at therapeutic dosage. So dopa tells you to sleep, okay? It tells you to sleep, methyl dopa. And also it tells your RBCs to sleep, hematological toxicity, okay? Early studies suggested that methyl dopa protected kidney function and was safe in pregnancy, but it is sometimes preferred for hypertension in pregnancy. Okay, so sympathoplegics, what are the compensatory responses? You have clonidine and methyl dopa. There is salt and water retention in all of them, okay? And alpha-1 selective blockers, you have slight tachycardia as well. Next, you have the ganglion blocking drugs. So nicotinic blockers that act in the ganglia are very efficacious, but because their adverse effects are severe, they are now considered obsolete. Hexamethonium and trimethophan are extremely powerful blood pressure lowering ganglion blocking drugs. What are they? Hexamethonium, okay? You are putting a hex on that to reduce the blood pressure. You are hexing the ganglia, okay? You are putting a magical hex on the ganglia to stop it, and you are lowering the blood pressure. And also trimethophan. Hex is 6, right? So tri is 3, you can remember it in that way. Next, you have postganglionic sympathetic nerve terminal blockers, so drugs that deplete the adrenergic nerve terminal of its norepinephrine stores, such as reserpine. They act on the reserves, so reserves are at the terminals, they act at the sympathetic nerve terminals, or that deplete and block release of the stores, such as guanethidine and guanadrel, can lower blood pressure. The major compensatory response is salt and water retention. In high dosages, these drugs are very efficacious but produce severe adverse effects and are now considered obsolete for hypertension. Monoamine oxidase inhibitors or MAO inhibitors were once used in hypertension because they cause the formation of a false transmitter, octopamine, in sympathetic postganglionic neuron terminals and lower the blood pressure. Octopamine is stored along with increased amounts of norepinephrine in the transmitter vesicles. Okay, if this is the cleft post neuron and this is the pre-neuron, presynaptic neuron. Octopamine is stored in the vesicles in the presynaptic neurons, and then when there are SANS or sympathetic nerve stimulation or impulses, they release a mixture of octopamine which has very low efficacy and norepinephrine, resulting in a smaller than normal increase in adrenoceptor response. So large doses of indirect acting sympathomimetics, on the other hand, such as the tyramine in a meal of fermented foods, may cause release of very large amounts of stored norepinephrine along with the octopamine and result in a hypertensive crisis. So you can recall that tyramine normally has very low bioavailability because of its mechanism by monoamine oxidase. In the presence of monoamine oxidase inhibitors, it has a much higher bioavailability, and because of this risk and the availability of better drugs, MAO inhibitors are no longer used in hypertension. However, they are still occasionally used for treatment of severe depressive disorders. So what is the risk? Eating a meal of fermented foods which are rich in tyramine. Okay, that is a risk if you use monoamine oxidase inhibitors to treat hypertension. Then you have adrenoceptor blockers. So alpha-1 selective agents such as prazosin, doxazosin and terazosin are moderately effective antihypertensive drugs. Alpha blockers reduce vascular resistance and venous return. The non-selective alpha blockers such as phentolamine and phenoxybenzamine are of no value in chronic hypertension because of excessive reflex tachycardia. Alpha-1 selective adrenoceptor blockers are relatively free of the severe adverse effects of non-selective alpha blockers and postganglionic nerve terminal sympathoplegic agents. They do, however, cause orthostatic hypotension, especially in the first few doses. On the other hand, they relax smooth muscle in the prostate, which is useful in benign prostatic hyperplasia. Okay, alpha receptors. Okay, this kind of looks like the prostate, right? Right. So prostate, they're useful in the prostate, and adren alpha 1 blockers you can use for hypertension as well. They cause, however, orthostatic hypotension in the first few doses. Beta blockers are used very heavily in the treatment of hypertension. So propranolol is the prototype obviously, and atenolol, metoprolol and carvedilol are among the most popular. They initially reduce cardiac output, but in chronic use their action may include a decrease in vascular resistance as a contributing effect. The latter effect may result from reduced angiotensin levels because beta blockers reduce renin release from the kidney. Beta blockers reduce renin release from the kidney. And metoprolol, carvedilol, labetalol used chronically also have beneficial effects in chronic cardiac failure. So nebivolol is a newer beta blocker with some direct vasodilator action caused by nitric oxide release. N for nebivolol, nitric oxide release. So it is a newer beta blocker, lol suffix, and it has a vasodilator action. Potential adverse effects are listed in the drug summary table. We'll discuss that later. So beta 1 selective blockers with fewer CNS effects may have some advantages over the non-selective and more lipid soluble agents. Let us look at some of the vasodilators. So you have hydralazine, minoxidil, nifedipine and other calcium channel blockers, nitroprusside, parenteral 1 and phenoldiazepam. So all of them cause salt and water retention. Okay, and in some cases, so hydralazine causes moderate tachycardia, minoxidil causes marked tachycardia, and there is minor salt and water retention while using calcium channel blockers such as nifedipine, and there is no marked tachycardia and nitroprusside use, but there is tachycardia and phenoldiazepam use. Okay. Now moving on to the vasodilators, so drugs that dilate blood vessels by acting directly on smooth muscle cells through non-autonomic mechanisms are useful in treating many hypertensive patients. So vasodilators act by 4 major mechanisms: blockade of calcium channels, you have nifedipine; release of nitric oxide; opening of potassium channels, which leads to hyperpolarization. So it leads to relaxation of the smooth muscle. See, when there is depolarization, the muscle contracts. When there is hyperpolarization, the muscle relaxes. Okay, so the muscles relax, the smooth muscle cells, that causes vasodilation. And there is also an activation of D1 dopamine receptors as a mechanism in vasodilation. So let us first discuss calcium channel blocking agents. So CCBs such as nifedipine, verapamil and diltiazem are effective vasodilators because they are moderately efficacious and orally active. These drugs are suitable for chronic use in hypertension of any severity. Verapamil and diltiazem also reduce cardiac output in most patients. Nifedipine is a prototype dihydropyridine calcium channel blocker, and many other dihydropyridines are available such as amlodipine, felodipine and istradipine. Because they are well tolerated and produce fewer compensatory responses, the calcium channel blockers are much more commonly used than hydralazine or minoxidil. Next we have hydralazine and minoxidil. M for M, okay, it causes marked tachycardia along with salt and water retention. Hydralazine causes moderate salt and water retention as well as moderate tachycardia. So these older vasodilators, have more effect on arterioles than they have on veins. So they are orally active and suitable for chronic therapy. Hydralazine apparently acts through the release of nitric oxide from endothelial cells. It causes significant baroreceptor homeostatic responses and must be combined with other drugs, usually diuretics and beta blockers. However, it is rarely used at high dosage because of its toxicity. Hydralazine-induced lupus erythematosus is reversible upon stopping the drug, and lupus is less common at dosages below 200 mg per day. Okay, hydralazine may cause lupus. Okay, hydralazine. Minoxidil is extremely efficacious and systemic administration is reserved for severe hypertension. Minoxidil is a prodrug. Its metabolite minoxidil sulfate is a potassium channel opener that hyperpolarizes and relaxes the vascular smooth muscle. The compensatory responses to minoxidil require the concomitant use of diuretics and beta blockers. So because it can cause hirsutism, minoxidil is also available as a topical agent for the treatment of baldness. Then we have nitroprusside, diazoxide and phenoldiazepam. So these parenteral vasodilators are used in hypertensive emergencies. Nitroprusside is a light sensitive short acting agent. It is light sensitive. So duration of action is just a few minutes. That must be infused continuously. The release of nitric oxide from the drug molecule itself stimulates guanylyl cyclase and increases cyclic GMP concentration and relaxation in the vascular smooth muscle. Diazoxide is a thiazide derivative but lacks diuretic properties. It is given as intravenous boluses, um, or as an infusion, and has several hours duration of action. Diazoxide opens potassium channels, thus hyperpolarizing and relaxing smooth muscle cells. This drug also reduces insulin release and can be used to treat hypoglycemia caused by insulin producing tumors. Then dopamine or D1 receptor activation by phenoldiazepam causes prompt marked arteriolar vasodilation. This drug is given by intravenous infusion. It has a short duration of action of 10 minutes and, like nitroprusside and diazoxide, is used for hypertensive emergencies. Okay, so here you can look at the mechanisms of action of vasodilators. So you can reduce the calcium influx via L-type channels. So you can use dihydropyridines blockers like nifedipine. So they block the vessels more than they do at the heart, and verapamil, diltiazem, they block the heart more than they do at the vessels. Then you can release nitric oxide from the drug or vascular endothelium. So nitroprusside, very short duration of action, or hydralazine. And then hyperpolarization of the vascular smooth muscle through opening of potassium channels. So minoxidil sulfate, which is the active metabolite of the prodrug minoxidil, and diazoxide, which is a thiazide derivative that has no renal functions, only cardiac functions. The activation of dopamine D1 receptors, you have phenoldiazepam. There is something to do with the cyclic GMP. Next, angiotensin antagonists and renin inhibitors. So the two primary groups of angiotensin antagonists are the angiotensin converting enzyme ACE inhibitors and angiotensin 2 receptor blockers, ACE inhibitors and receptor blockers. So ACE inhibitors such as captopril, which inhibit the enzyme variously known as angiotensin converting enzyme kinase 2 and peptidyl dipeptidase, cause a reduction in blood levels of angiotensin 2 and aldosterone and an increase in the endogenous vasodilators of the kinin family, such as bradykinin. ACE inhibitors have a low incidence of serious adverse effects except in pregnancy when given in normal dosage, and produce minimal compensatory responses. The ACE inhibitors are useful in heart failure and diabetes as well as hypertension. The toxicities of ACE inhibitors include cough up to 30% of patients, hyperkalemia, and renal damage in occasional patients with pre-existing renal vascular disease, although they protect the diabetic kidney. They cause major renal damage in the fetus and are absolutely contraindicated in pregnancy. In contrast, they have beneficial effects in chronic cardiac failure and diabetic renal disease. The second group of angiotensin antagonists, the receptor blockers, is represented by the orally active agents losartan, valsartan, irbesartan, candesartan, and other angiotensin receptor blockers, which competitively inhibit angiotensin 2 at its AT1 receptor site. ARBs appear to be as effective in lowering blood pressure as the ACE inhibitors and have the advantage of a lower incidence of cough, although they do cause hyperkalemia. Like the ACE inhibitors, they cause fetal renal toxicity and are thus contraindicated in pregnancy. Aliskiren is a newer drug in the antihypertensive group and inhibits renin's action on its substrate, angiotensinogen. Okay, it is a renin inhibitor. It thus reduces the formation of angiotensin 1. It's an angiotensin 1 inhibitor, but it causes renin to fail to do its action. Okay, aliskiren. Okay, renin. Okay, and in consequence, angiotensin 2. So toxicities include headache and diarrhea. It does not appear to cause cough, but it is not yet known whether it has other toxicities of the angiotensin antagonists. It does not show the reproductive toxicity in animals, but is considered to be contraindicated in pregnancy because of the known toxicity of ACE inhibitors and ARBs. Angiotensin antagonists and renin inhibitors reduce aldosterone levels. So angiotensin 2 is a major stimulant of aldosterone release and cause potassium retention. If the patient has renal impairment, is consuming a high potassium diet, or is taking other drugs that tend to conserve potassium, potassium concentrations may reach toxic levels. So here you can see the actions of aliskiren, angiotensin ACE inhibitors, and AT1 receptor blockers or ARBs. So renin converts angiotensinogen, the inactive peptide, to angiotensin 1, which is an inactive decapeptide. Okay, aliskiren blocks this conversion of renin to angiotensin 1, and it hence reduces angiotensin 1 and hence 2 levels. Then angiotensin converting enzyme ACE, okay, what it does is it converts that angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2, which is the active vasoconstrictor. Okay, ACE inhibitors prevent this step. And finally, angiotensin 2, it acts at the AT1 receptors, and you can block this by using ARBs. So AT1 receptor antagonists lack the effect on bradykinin levels, which may explain the lower incidence of cough observed with these agents. Okay, so blocked by aliskiren blocks the sequence at its start. Now moving on to the clinical uses of antihypertensive drugs. So there is stepped care or polypharmacy. So therapy of hypertension is complex because the disease is symptomless until far advanced, and because the drugs may cause major compensatory responses and significant toxicities. However, compensatory responses can usually be minimized and overall toxicity can often be reduced by the use of multiple drugs at lower dosages in patients with moderate or severe hypertension. Typically, drugs are added to a patient's regimen in a stepwise fashion. Each additional agent is chosen from a different subgroup until adequate blood pressure control has been achieved. The usual steps include lifestyle measures first, such as salt restriction and weight reduction. Then you use diuretics, such as thiazide diuretics. Then you use ACE inhibitors or ARBs, vasodilators, and usually calcium channels or sympathoplegics. Okay. So first, you start the step. Let us just ignore the sequence of steps we made in the first. So first you use diuretics, then ACE inhibitors, okay, and then you have vasodilators, and finally you have sympathoplegics, okay, DAVS, okay. The ability of drugs in steps 2, 3 and 4 to reduce the compensatory responses induced by the others should be noted, such as propranolol reduces the tachycardia induced by hydralazine. Thus, rational polypharmacy minimizes toxicities while producing additive or superadditive therapeutic effects. So, if hydralazine is administered in moderate dosage for several weeks, compensatory cardiac and renal responses will be observed. So, you can specify the exact mechanisms and structures involved. We'll look at the answers later. Then moving on to monotherapy, it has been found in large clinical studies that many patients do well on a single drug, such as an ACE inhibitor, CCB, or alpha-beta blocker. This approach to the treatment of mild and moderate hypertension has become more popular than stepped care because of its simplicity, better patient compliance, and with modern drugs a relatively low incidence of toxicity. And moving on to age and ethnicity, older patients of most races respond better to diuretics and beta blockers than to ACE inhibitors. African Americans of all ages respond better to diuretics and CCBs, and they respond less well to ACE inhibitors. There is considerable inter-individual variability in the metabolism of beta blockers. Older individuals, they respond better to diuretics, okay, let them urinate and let them get beta blockers. Hypertensive emergency, it is formally called malignant hypertension. It is an accelerated form of severe hypertension associated with rising BP and rapidly progressing damage to the vessels and end organs. Management of hypertensive emergency must be carried out on an urgent basis in the hospital. Powerful vasodilators such as nitroprusside immediately, phenoldiazepam or diazoxide are combined with diuretics such as furosemide and beta blockers to lower blood pressure to the 140, 60 or 90 to 110 mm of Hg range promptly within a few hours. Further reduction is then pursued more slowly. So that is all about this chapter. Let's just look at the skill keeper answers. The FDA, Food and Drug Administration, requires a broad range of animal data provided by the developer in an investigational new drug application or an IND application before clinical trials can be started. These data must show that the drug has the expected effects on blood pressure in animals and has low and well-defined toxicity in at least 2 species. A new drug application NDA must be submitted and approved before marketing can begin. This application usually requires data on pharmacokinetics in normal volunteers phase 1, efficacy and safety in a small group of closely observed patients phase 2, and efficacy and safety in a much larger group of patients under conditions of actual use or phase 3. For drugs intended for highly lethal diseases such as cancer, the more infectious diseases, etc., the FDA may allow modified and accelerated or combined phase adaptive clinical trials. And moving on to this one, the compensatory responses to hydralazine are tachycardia, obviously that is why you use the beta blocker, and also salt and water retention. These responses are generated by the baroreceptor and renin-angiotensin-aldosterone mechanisms. The motor limb of the sympathetic response consists of outflow from the vasomotor center to the heart and vessels. So figure 11.2. This is a very important high yield diagram. Okay, it is better if you learn this. And then that is all of this chapter. You can just have a glance of this. Okay, so that is all.